Handler Walter is the kind of hero who's trying really, really hard to not act like a hero. He puts on this performance of being cold, uncaring, manipulative, using the people around him as tools to further his own schemes. But the simple truth is that Walter does care about the people around him, and no matter how much he pretends to be cold and unsympathetic, his true feelings inevitably shine through. He can't help but care about the mercenary pilot he calls 621. He cannot help but to relinquish control and allow 621 to make their own choices, even if those choices contradict his own plans. When the time comes to choose between his mission and the life of 621, he does choose 621, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves here. I want to start this analysis of Handler Walter's character from the very beginning. To examine how this character is introduced to the player, we're going to watch the opening cutscene of the game.
We're close to Rubicon. Wake the dog up.
Handler Walter verified. Activating cerebral coral control device. Augmented human C4621 has awakened.
Time to get to work, 621. I'm powering down your entry capsule on my signal. Activate the AC.
This is how the writers are introducing Walter's character to us. And as I mentioned before, at first he appears very cold and unsympathetic. He refers to our character as the dog, which is a really derogatory and even derisive way to refer to someone. Just a dog, just an animal, less than human, just here to do work for Walter, their human handler. But who is Walter speaking to here? Who is he telling to wake the dog up? I think that computer voice we hear is actually a part of 621's artificial augmentation, part of our character's nervous system that has been replaced by a computer system, and Walter is interfacing directly with that computer system. It's probably worth noting that Walter does not call our character a dog to our face. As soon as we're awake, he only ever refers to us as 621, our artificial augmentation serial number. With this name, 621, he's still treating us as something a bit less than human, but at least he's not treating us like an animal anymore. Instead, he treats us like a machine. This contrasts with Air later on, who calls us Raven, which is something much closer to a humanizing name, and part of why 621 ultimately develops a closer relationship with Air than other characters, because she treats 621 like an actual person. She cares about 621's feelings. But let's get back to Walter. Walter himself kind of acts like a machine in his dialogue. He doesn't really behave like a human being with feelings. Just listen to his dialogue. It is so stripped down, so stripped of anything emotional or sensitive. His words are efficient, to the point, soldier-like. Walter is a man on a mission, and for much of the game he cares about nothing but completing that mission. But we won't learn what that mission is until much later in the game. At the start of the game, he has a cover story, a false reason for operating on planet Rubicon, which we will hear about in this next cutscene.
If we get our hands on Rubicon's coral, we'll make a killing. Plenty for a merc with a fried brain like you to buy their life back. Enough chat, back to work. Scavenge the AC wrecks ahead and find a valid mercenary license. We're illegals here. You'll need ID to operate.
Walter says that if they can find Coral together on Rubicon, he and 621 will make oodles and oodles of cash. And he gives 621 a motivation to be here too, enough money to buy your life back. Walter says that 621 has a fried brain. I think he's referring to the side effects of early generation augmentation. It's made clear in other parts of the game that very few subjects survived those early rounds of augmentation. The surgeries and implants and Coral destroyed their minds and bodies. 621 is a survivor of 4th generation augmentation. That augmentation has allowed them to expertly pilot an armored core, but it has damaged their brain, left them incapable of speech. With enough money, 621 could undergo later generation augmentation, which could reverse some of those side effects. Another AC pilot in the game, V3 O'Keefe of the Vespers, has done exactly that. His arena bio states that he only agreed to work with Arquebus if they provided him with Generation 9 augmentation to counteract the coral burn-in on his brain. I suspect that 621 has similar coral burn-in. Handler Walter is pretty openly manipulating 621 here. We see in the story trailer that 621 appears to be barely functioning, barely still surviving their augmentation surgeries. 621 is desperate and Handler Walter offers them hope. At first, this was probably just a false hope. When they first met, I doubt if Walter had any intention of following through on this promise. I don't think it's until after he sees how hard 621 fights, how crucial 621 becomes to his mission, that he starts to grow more sympathetic to them. So this is Handler Walter's stated motivation. He's here to make money, lots and lots of money. And to do that, he's looking for coral. This is the Handler Walter we are dealing with for the entire first chapter of the game. He's someone who doesn't care about anything but the mission, and that mission is making money. He is cold, acts like even more of a machine than 621 at times. Together, we take on cynical corporate contracts to destroy and slaughter the planet's native resistance, the Rubicon Liberation Front. At the start, this is a sort of miserable story about two pretty miserable, desperate, and greedy characters. It's not until the very end of Chapter 1 that his character gets a little more interesting. Towards the end of Chapter 1, Walter receives a mysterious message from an, at that point, unknown party. Let's listen to it together.
Long time no see, Walter. Looking good for a change. I see you've got a new augmented human. What happened to 617 and the rest?
Their jobs. They did what it took to get us here.
Huh. So how's the newcomer doing?
Adequately. But Gen 4 augmentation can be unstable. We need to choose our battles. How's things on your end?
I found the data our friends left behind. There's something promising in the watch point.
So Walter is speaking with Cinder Carla, who we meet in-game later on. She's the mysterious leader of the RAD, a group of dosers and black market weapon manufacturers, which we will eventually learn she is using as a front for a hidden faction on Rubicon, the Overseers, of which both she and Walter are members. This dialogue between the two is the first time in the game when it becomes apparent that Walter's motivations and character are not as simple as he is presenting. He has some other motivation to be here, some other scheme he's not being honest about. We also learned that he was previously working with another group of AC pilots who, like 621, are only ever referred to by their serial numbers. Just like our player character, they were stripped of their humanity by augmentation surgeries. And notice how callously Walter speaks of his previous partners. They did their jobs. That's all he has to say about people who he once worked side by side with. People who sacrificed their lives to further his plans. But remember, Walter isn't actually this cold. We'll see later that he really does grow to care about 621, which means he probably cared about those former pilots too. Then why is he acting so coldly here? Well, Walter is written very similarly to another character I've covered extensively on this channel, Kratos from God of War. In the newer God of War games, Kratos is a character who keeps his emotions bottled up so that he can protect himself from those emotions, to protect himself from his own destructive anger, from the guilt he feels. I think Handler Walter does something very similar in Armored Core 6. He purposely represses his emotions, whatever guilt or sorrow he feels for those deaths, so that he can focus on his mission, so he can complete this task he feels must be accomplished. But who were 617 and the rest? We can actually see their deaths in the Armored Core 6 6-story trailer. Here we see 617, 619, and 620 getting killed during some combat operation run by Walter. Fans have speculated that they are punching a hole in the PCA's planetary defense system here. I'm unconvinced by that theory, but it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this essay. In an analysis of Handler Walter's character, all that matters is that all three of them died for him, and because they died, he had to resort to recruiting 621 as a desperate replacement. 621 actually appears in that trailer too. You can see his warped and emaciated body lying on an operating table. Here, visually, we can see how drastic and destructive 621's augmentation was. A voice in the trailer states that 621 is barely operational, that Walter should not expect him to do anything other than function at a very basic level. Recruiting 621 was a really desperate move by Walter. He only did it because he had no other choice, because all of his other pilots were dead. But let's get back to that conversation between Walter and Carla. Carla tells Walter that there is something promising in the Watchpoint, and then Walter assigns 621 the mission of attacking that Watchpoint, which is a huge risk considering it's being defended by the Subject Guard, government forces who even the corporations are not willing to engage with. There we meet Sula, an independent mercenary who clearly knows Walter, knows about the cold and callous way Walter treats his mercenaries, the way he sacrifices their lives. Sula personally knew those 3 dead pilots from the trailer. Sula's dialogue is meant to make us, the audience, question Walter's motivations, question his treatment of 621, question whether we can trust this guy at all. The something promising in the Watchpoint turns out to be some leftover coral, and specifically, this coral contains the coral consciousness entity known as Air, who makes contact with 621 here. Air and Walter are sort of foils to each other. Where Walter is cold and unsympathetic and manipulative, Air is emotional. She expresses her feelings. She's open about her intentions and her motivations. She expresses concern for 621's well-being in a way that Walter never does. The writers want you to warm up to Air. Her warmth contrasts his coldness. The writers are intending for you to choose her over him. Except that Walter does contain warmth. He does express his feelings in small ways. He becomes a more complex character as the story progresses, and that complicates the player's choice too. Chapter 2 is all about Air, but Walter has a lot more to say and do in chapters 3 and 4. However, what's most interesting to me about his character here is the way he gives up control. At the start of the game, Walter is presented as being controlling and manipulative. He's here on Rubicon to accomplish a very specific personal mission, and he's just using 621 as a tool, a means to an end. However, in chapters 3 and 4, Walter really does give up that control. He lets 621 choose their own missions, even if those choices ultimately contradict his own plans. He begins to recognize 621 as a person, as an equal partner, someone with feelings and needs, not just a tool, not just a mutt. The player will experience this in gameplay. As the game progresses, you, the player, are allowed more and more control over choosing your own missions. And in these chapters, Walter begins to very obviously care about 621, care about their well-being, care about how they are being treated by others. To see this development in Walter's character, we are going to listen to 3 different clips of his dialogue. Here's the first one.
How's it going, Walter?
Hard to say. 621's still performing well, but I doubt the voices have gone away. At any rate, whatever the voices are doesn't seem to be doing any harm. For now.
I was asking about you, Walter. But whatever. Bigger things. The coral. You'd better find it. Turns out, our friend's fears were warranted. Don't spend too long dealing with the PCA, Walter. Clock's ticking.
In this conversation, Carla asks Walter how he's doing, as his comrade in the Overseers, as his friend. And instead of saying anything about himself, how he personally is holding up, how he personally is feeling, Walter only speaks about 621. He talks about 621's well-being, his concern over whether 621 is being harmed by those voices they're hearing. Here, Walter is revealing his true priorities, what he really cares about, and I doubt that even he realizes he's doing it. He doesn't doesn't actually care about the mission as much as he cares about 621. We know this because he doesn't talk about how the mission is progressing in this dialogue. He only talks about 621. Now, to see more evidence of this care, let's listen to 2 more clips.
You again. I'm a busy man, far too busy for the likes of you.
So I hear. Must be a tough time to be the Vesper's deputy commander.
Get to the point.
The plan to raid the PCA. You're going to need more pawns on the board.
Of course, you're here to hawk your services again. Very well. I'll consider that mutt of yours part of the effort.
One more thing. Show my hound some respect. Gen 4's as good a pedigree as any other.
We got ourselves a deal, Handler Walter.
Michigan. So, Arquebus met us halfway?
I gave them the heavy warship fleet. In exchange, Balaam's in charge of putting down the beast. They also offered some top Vespers. Guess they don't trust us.
Better than nothing. I'll provide what support I can, too.
Yeah, your mad scientists, RAD or whatever, and that hound of yours.
Michigan. Don't underestimate 621. That hound always delivers.
In each of these clips, Walter is leaping to 621's defense. He is asking the commanders of the Red Guns and the Vespers to treat 621 with the respect they deserve, the respect they have earned. There is no reason for Walter to do this. Whether or not 621 is treated with respect makes no difference to Walter's mission. Everyone in the game can treat 621 like a dog, and Walter can still accomplish his mission. And yet, Walter still goes out of his way to defend 621. Out of his way to make sure 621 is being treated right by those other commanders. There is something parental in Walter's dialogue here, a fatherly quality, or maybe a big brother. He's looking out for his son or little bro, making sure the other kids are treating him right. There's something really touching about this dialogue. Walter is trying to make things better for 621 in the small ways that he can, and it shows a development in their relationship. At the start, Walter treated 621 as a tool, something less than human to be used. But 621 has worked their butt off, has accomplished some really incredible things. And in doing so, I think 621 has actually earned Walter's respect. This is all further evidence that Walter is a character who cares. Now, let's move on to the reveal of Walter's true intentions and his past. At the bottom of Watchpoint Alpha, you discover the ruins of Institute City and the vascular plant, where all the surviving coral on the planet has been slowly converging. And afterwards, Walter finally explains why he's been searching for that coral. So let's listen to that now.
Let me tell you a story before you go. There once was a scientist. He abandoned his family to delve into the secrets of coral. His work yielded a carnival of horrors, augmentation surgery included. But there was another scientist. He took his colleagues' sins upon himself and set it all ablaze. Died with no regrets. There's a lesson in this story. Once something's alive, it doesn't die easy. 621. Story time's over. It's time for work.
It's important to note that Walter is still putting some distance between himself and his true feelings, between his past and his present. Instead of just saying, this is who I am and this is what I want, he has to obliquely reveal those things through this story, in a more distant third-person narration. This is another way that Walter protects himself from his own emotions. By putting his feelings into this story, telling it as if it has nothing to do with him, it protects him from having to deal with those feelings and those events directly. The scientist who abandoned his family was Walter's own father, a man whose research created what Walter refers to as a carnival of horrors. It seems to me that Walter feels some personal responsibility for the sins of his father. He has dedicated his life to making those wrongs right, even though he's not the one who actually committed those sins. The other scientist in the story is Professor Nagai, the director of the Rubicon Research Institute, who ignited the fires of Ibis, destroying himself, and the institute he had led, and the planet's surface, and even the entire surrounding star system. All this destruction and attempt to prevent a coral convergence. Walter clearly admires Professor Nagai, believes that his sacrifice was honorable. Walter plans to emulate his hero, to recreate that sacrifice, to light a second fire, to destroy coral so that it can never again be misused in those hideous ways that his father misused it, so those sins can never be repeated. If Walter succeeds in lighting a second fire, he knows that he will die, but not just him. Probably everyone else on the planet will be killed too. The Rubiconians, the corporations, the mercenaries, 621, Carla, the PCA, all of them. And not just them either. The fire will spread throughout space. There is no way to predict how far it will spread, how many inhabited planets it might burn. In some ways, this motivation makes Walter into a kind of monster. No wonder he has to put on this cold and callous mask to suppress his own feelings when he plans to commit such a horrific and destructive act. But from another perspective, Walter is a kind of hero. It becomes clear in the other endings that coral simply cannot be controlled or contained. It replicates too fast. It contains too much energy. As long as it exists, coral convergence and coral release are inevitable. These will be destructive events. They will transform the entire galaxy. They will transform the human race, actually destroy the human race, and give birth to something new in our place. The only way to prevent this is to burn all of the coral. Walter and the other overseers have made the perhaps heroic choice to sacrifice themselves and everyone else on the planet to save the rest of humanity, to right the wrongs of the past. Of course, from yet another perspective, he's really just recommitting an old sin, continuing to hold humanity back from its inevitable and necessary evolution, killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions in the process. Walter's motivations are morally ambiguous. The writers leave it up to the player to decide what is right or wrong here. The writers at From Software never write stories with obvious good guys and bad guys, never tell tales of heavy-handed morality. They always write morally gray stories where most characters are truly just trying to do their best in an impossible situation. As a side note, the only reason Walter himself survived the fires of Ibis is because he was sent away to Jupiter, while the planet he had called home, everyone he had ever known, his entire life was burned away. He could only watch from a distance. This time, he won't just watch though. This time, he plans to light those fires himself. In the first two playthroughs, Walter will be captured by Arquebus, then sent to a re-education camp where he is tortured, probably forcefully augmented, and definitely literally brainwashed into becoming a slave for Arquebus. However, before becoming a slave, he somehow manages to rescue 621, to put our comatose body in an old AC, and send us to relative safety in the ruined sewers of Institute City. When 621 wakes up, we hear a message Walter left for us, which we're going to listen to now.
621. A friend of mine sent a request. Now, this one comes from me. You know what hidden dangers lurk within the coral. The fires of Ibis should have wiped the coral out, but it survived, gathered, and it's been steadily multiplying ever since. Now the coral convergence is growing at an exponential rate. Eventually, it'll spill out from Rubicon and contaminate space itself. The coral must be burned, 621. Even if that means reigniting the fire that scorched the stars. This isn't an order. It's a legacy. My fallen friends entrusted this duty to me, and now it's my turn to hand it on. 621. Feed the fire. Let the last cinders burn. I have one last job for you. Find your freedom.
Walter starts off this message by propping up a familiar artifice. He has another request from a friend. Then he catches himself and changes his mind. No, this is a request from me. This is a really important moment for his character. The moment when he finally drops all the artifice, drops all the masks, closes the emotional distance, and chooses to be honest. For the first time in the entire game, he is being totally open about his motivations and feelings. All this time, Walter wasn't really doing any of this for himself. He's been doing it for his fallen comrades. With their deaths, they left him a duty, and he feels honor-bound to carry it out, no matter the cost. If he fails in this task, he won't be failing himself. He feels that he will fail all those fallen comrades, render their sacrifices meaningless. That's why he's fighting so hard. That's why he cannot give up. But in the end, he cannot light those fires himself. He has been captured and muzzled by Arquebus. So in a final desperate act, he does the only thing he can do. He asks 621 to complete his mission for him, knowing that 621 might choose a different path, knowing that 621 might fail. Notably, his final job isn't actually to burn the coral. Instead, it's the much more cryptic phrase, "Find your freedom." Let's fast forward to the endings now, both of which involve Walter. You can choose to fulfill Walter, your savior and benefactor's, final wish. You can choose to burn the coral. If you do so, afterwards, you'll hear one final message from Walter, in which he thanks 621, expresses a hope that someday 621 might fulfill their true potential. In typical Handler Walter fashion, this message is curt, quick, and to the point, but it does contain genuine affection and gratitude, is a meaningful conclusion to his character's story arc. In the other ending, if we choose to free the coral, Arquebus will send a brainwashed and augmented Walter to stop us. He serves as the final boss in the game. In his dialogue, at first he says he's fighting for the corporation, but then changes his mind, and says that he is fighting for his fallen friends instead. He also says that he can see and hear air for the first time, a result of his new coral-based augmentation. He begs 621 to make a different choice, to burn the coral. He says that we can take all the money we earned from those corporate missions, use it to afford surgery to undo the coral burn-in on our brains, to buy a new life for ourselves, to do exactly what he had promised at the start of the game. His dialogue in this final battle is genuinely kind of heartbreaking. He clearly doesn't want to fight this fight, but whether it's the corporate brainwashing or the wishes of his dead friends, he feels that he has to fight. When you actually defeat him, something really fascinating occurs, which we're going to watch together now.
The mission. My friend's wishes. Look at you, 621. You found a friend.
Walter! We have to go, Raven.
It's really important to note that Walter has broken through the Arquebus brainwashing here. His strength of will is so great that not even the terrible scientists at Arquebus with all their power can keep him muzzled. When he makes this choice, he is making it as Walter, not as Arquebus's puppet. He is choosing to stop fighting. He's choosing to lower his weapon, to let 621 live with his newfound friend, to give up on his old destructive mission. For me, this is the moment when Walter becomes a true hero. Walter has spent all his life fighting for his fallen comrades, but 621 has become a comrade too, a partner, even a friend. And more importantly, 621 is still alive. Is Walter really going to kill 621 just to honor the wishes of all those long dead people? And it turns out that the answer is no. In the end, Walter proves that he cares more about 621 than he cares about his mission. He cares more about the living than the dead. In the end, Walter's cold and callous and unfeeling mask is proven to be just that, a mask. An artifice, never his true self. In truth, Walter was always a character who cared. I was really surprised and impressed by the writing in Armored Core 6. I think this is some of the best narrative work From Software has ever done, because the characters in this story have so much more character than a lot of their other games. These characters are written to be complex, to have ambiguous motivations, to have big personalities, to go through full character arcs, to be really memorable. And at the top of that pile of memorable characters is Handler Walter, this gruff and controlling mercenary handler, fighting for the dead, fighting to burn down the world, who, in his last moments, cannot bring himself to raise his weapon against a friend, even if it means abandoning the mission that dominated his entire life. I think Walter is easily one of the best characters From Software has ever written.